Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Mariancho, and it's time to update my wide receiver rankings entering 2025. In this video, we're going to extend the players ranked all the way through the top 80. So there's no time to waste. Let's get it going. We're going to go 2 by 2. At the top, it's pretty obvious. I got Ja'Marr Chase and CeeDee Lamb at numbers 1 and 2. Now, I do think there's a big tier break between Ja'Marr and CeeDee Lamb. I'd rather have the elite running backs than CeeDee Lamb. But these two players are the best wide receivers in the NFL as long as their quarterback is healthy. The last 2 seasons, they were operating as the top receiver in the game in their respective offenses. But it's just a question of, will things repeat? I think in Cincinnati, it's all destined to be the same with Joe Burrow and a bad defense. Ja'Marr's locked into number 1. And then CeeDee Lamb, even with George Pickens, there's no competition. It also looks like the Cowboys defense is going to be missing Micah Parsons and Trayvon Diggs, at least entering week 1, and that's going to be a terrible defense in Dallas. These two are definitely the best wide receivers this year. Next up at 3 and 4, I'm going to hold put on Justin Jefferson at number 3, and I am going to upgrade Nico Collins up to number 4. Both of these two players are benefiting from the fact that their number 2 weapon is going to miss some time. With Jefferson, it appears that he's about to return to practice with that hamstring injury. In general, you don't want to be chasing injuries, but Jefferson's one of the best receivers in the league. It's just a question of will his quarterback live up to expectation? But because Jordan Addison is suspended, for the first 3 weeks, there's just a shit ton of volume. Jefferson's going to be the security blanket for J.J. McCarthy in his rookie season. So as much as I'm a little concerned that maybe Jefferson has some injury risk cropping up later in the year, I still think he's the guy that you want after CeeDee Lamb. He's just so talented. His career has just been so exceptional up to this point. It's hard to bet against him. And then with Nico Collins, I think he really benefits from the fact that Joe Mixon has that foot injury. I have no idea when Mixon is coming back on the field, and until he doesn't, Stroud is just going to lean on him even more. This offense is going to be hyper pass heavy, and Nico Collins will benefit. He's the clear go-to target, and as long as he's been healthy the last 2 seasons, he's been averaging at least 14.5 points per game, week in, week out. He's a stud, and he's a matchup nightmare. I will rely on him. He's healthy as of now, so even though he's missed 25% of his games in his career, at least in the moment, I have to buy into the upside. I think Nico is the wide receiver 4 at this point in time. But at 5 and 6, I'm not changing anything with these two players. This tier is the second-year LSU wide receivers, Malik Nabers and Brian Thomas Jr. With Nabers, the target share is locked in to 30+%. The only new addition that is really just coming back from injury, not really a new piece, would be Theo Johnson that maybe eats into the target share, but not worried about Wan'Dale, not worried about Darius Slayton. Nabers is clearly the go-to target, and he also gets a quarterback upgrade this year. Whether it's Russell Wilson or Jackson Dart, they're going to rely on him every week like crazy. So an elite target share is lined up for Nabers, and with Brian Thomas, he's just uncoverable down the field. He could potentially be the number 1 receiver this season if last year's second half of the season production is consistent all year long. He was averaging over 21 points per game in his last 4 games without Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram. Those 2 guys are gone, but replaced with Travis Hunter. Trevor Lawrence, though, is still going to rely on BTJ. So love Nabers and Brian Thomas. And then at 7 and 8, I am mixing things up. I'm upgrading Drake London 2 spots. He's just locked into so much volume. His quarterback is better this year. Michael Penix slings it down the field, one of the best deep ball throwers I think this league has to offer. And with Darnell Mooney injured at the moment, I have no idea when he's coming back. London played exceptionally well last year when Mooney was hurt. So there could be 15 targets in line for London until Mooney comes back. I can't see a scenario where London at the age of 24 does burn you. So he's my wide receiver 7, moving up 2 spots. I think he's elevating a full tier. And then another 24-year-old that's just locked into consistent volume would be Puka Nacua. However, his quarterback situation is a legitimate red flag at the moment. As of today, Matthew Stafford has returned to practice, but that back injury is a major red flag, and it could easily crop up again. If you told me Puka has to deal with 6 or 8 games with Jimmy Garoppolo this season, I wouldn't be that surprised. and it definitely craters some of the upside. Puka in general does not score many touchdowns. I don't think he's as safe as we thought a month and a half ago. So he moves down 4 spots. I'd rather take London above him. And on top of the quarterback concerns, maybe Davante Adams is a big threat for touchdown production in LA. So that's just kind of a weird situation. There's too much of a smoke screen surrounding the health of Stafford for me to feel fully comfortable. I have to lower Puka a little bit, but he's only dropping down 1 tier. I think he's guaranteed to give you top 10 production when healthy. Next up at 9 and 10, we have the bust-proof veterans Amon-Ra St. Brown and A.J. Brown, and there's really no issue with them, but St. Brown I do think is moving down 2 spots. He did get jumped by Drake London as well as Nico Collins. I am a little worried that the Lions offense is just not as good this season with the new offensive coordinator. Losing Ben Johnson is not going to be an upgrade for St. Brown. So this year, JMO is sounding like he might take a leap. According to John Morton, the new offensive coordinator, that's what you should expect. And then last year, Laporta was a little banged up. This year, he's fully healthy. And then Isaac Tesla looks pretty good in the preseason. I have to factor that in. Last year, there was no wide receiver 3 at all in this offense. So St. Brown probably sees a few less targets this season, and he's kind of touchdown dependent in general. I don't know if he's top 8 this season, but he's guaranteed top 10. And then A.J. Brown is staying put. He's been my wide receiver 10 all offseason. Can't think of a reason to fade A.J. Brown. But the Eagles offense does not throw the ball as much as some of the other teams around the NFL. So limited volume just because Jalen Hurts does hand it off a little bit more and also runs it in himself when it's close on the goal line. So these are the top 10. I think these are all very reliable players. You can't really go wrong with these players. However, once we hit wide receiver 11, once we're in the wide receiver 2 market, I think there's a massive tier break and things look way, way different. It's just not as reliable, not as safe. But at number 11 and 12 in this tier, I got the matchup nightmares T. Higgins of the Bengals and Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Bucks. With T. Higgins, he's moving up 3 spots because Ladd McConkey, I am dropping down. I'm also not as confident in Davante Adams anymore with the Stafford situation. And then Tyreek Hill also scares the shit out of me. I think Tyreek is probably getting traded. So it's not that I'm more confident in T. Higgins. I view him exactly the same. It's just that 3 other players did drop down since the last time I made these rankings. So T. Higgins is benefiting. He moves up 3 spots. And last year, he was a top 10 receiver. As long as he's healthy, he's a stud. He's pretty much unguardable. And the touchdown production is pretty much locked in. It's hard to envision less than 10 touchdowns for T. Higgins as long as he's healthy. But last season, he missed 5 games. The year before that, he missed 5 games as well. There is some injury concern with T. Higgins. He rarely plays a full season. He's dealt with reoccurring hamstring and soft tissue injuries in his lower body. So T. Higgins is a stud, but just maybe not going to play a full bevy of games. And then Mike Evans at the age of 32 also has some injury concerns as well. He probably misses 1 or 2 games at the minimum. But last year, he was a top 3 receiver in fantasy when Chris Godwin was injured. And at the moment, Chris Godwin's injured again. I don't know when Godwin will return. He's starting the season on the PUP list. And a lot of the excitement that I gave to Emeka Egbuka last time I made these rankings should also go to Mike Evans. I think he does deserve an upgrade. I previously had him at number 20. And last year, when Godwin was healthy, he did operate as the number 2 receiver and was barely top 20 overall in fantasy, but at the moment, I think he's just locked into so much volume, such reliable touchdown production as well, and you know he's going to break the record for 1,000 receiving yards in consecutive seasons. So I can't really envision a scenario where Mike Evans lets you down unless he gets hurt, and for that reason, as a matchup nightmare, I got to upgrade him. He was top 10 last season in points per game at the wide receiver position, so I'm going to trust him. I just can't think of a reason not to. But once Godwin comes back, perhaps the target share in Tampa is a little too crowded where he's actually going to live up to this production. But until Godwin comes back, I could see Mike Evans be a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy. That's what he was doing last season when Godwin was hurt. So I trust Mike Evans. I think he's a great pick in the 3rd round. I can't really think of a reason not to trust him. Next up at 13 and 14, this tier is very reliable, a very safe floor with both guys. These are the 23-year-old slot wide receiver ones in their respective offenses. I got Ladd McConkey and JSN, and there's nothing to be that concerned about, but I do think Ladd McConkey drops down a tier. With the addition of Keenan Allen, that's probably going to eat into the touchdown production. It's kind of a crowded wide receiver room at the moment in LA, and Keenan Allen's pretty legit. It's not like before when Quentin Johnston was the biggest threat for touches in this target share. So Ladd McConkey definitely moves down because of that. And then with the injury at left tackle to Rashawn Slater, it's possible that the Chargers offense just isn't as good at converting touchdowns. I think they might use Cameron Dicker to score more points this season. So Ladd does drop down a little bit, but he's still hyper productive, a very safe floor. I just no longer have him as the number 11 receiver. I don't have him in the same tier as A.J. Brown anymore. So he does lose a little bit of value, but at wide receiver 13, I still trust him a lot. And then at 14, I think JSN is locked into a shit ton of volume. I have no concern with Cooper Kupp really threatening him. And I think there's a minor quarterback upgrade, at least potentially, with Sam Darnold. I don't think Darnold is any worse than Geno Smith. Last year, he was significantly better. And he's also reuniting with his former offensive coordinator in San Francisco. Darnold knows the system that the Seahawks are going to run this year. So I don't see that many growing pains. I trust JSN to see a shit ton of targets. And last year in games without DK Metcalf, he was putting up over 21 points per game in those two matchups. DK Metcalf is gone, so is Tyler Lockett, and perhaps Torrey Horton is legit, but at some point Cooper Kupp is probably going to miss some time with injury. So I trust JSN. I think he's a stud to trust. In round 3, I think he's one of the best picks at receiver. But next up at 15 and 16, I think there are some legitimate red flags here. I'd rather get them in round 4, but at that price, I think it's hard for them to bust. I got the veterans that I trust no matter what, with Devontae Adams at 15 and Terry McLaurin at 16. Earlier in the offseason, I was in love with Adams entering the year. I thought he was guaranteed to be top 12, and now I'm not quite as convinced because of the Stafford injury. He has to lose some value because of Stafford's back. If Jimmy Garoppolo's throwing him the ball, or even Stetson Bennett, it's just not going to be the same caliber offense. So touchdowns will be harder to come by, but Adams is still like a reliable option, pretty much bust proof, and gonna be burning corners all season long. His releases are still some of the best off the line of scrimmage. So I still trust Devontae Adams, but maybe the touchdown production is not going to be as high as I was anticipating. He does move down 3 spots, but still at wide receiver 15, I'm happy to draft him on my roster. At 16, though, with Terry McLaurin still unsigned, there are some red flags, but ultimately I'm not worried. I expect him to be still with the Washington Commanders by week 1. And although he was dealing with an ankle injury, he's played all 17 games each of the last 4 years. He's also gone over 1,000 receiving yards each of the last 5 years. And even if somehow he does get traded, whether it's to a terrible team or not, 1,000 yards is guaranteed for Terry McLaurin. So it's really just a question of how many touchdowns does he put up. I still think in this offense, the Commanders will get him at least 9 or 10. I don't see it falling off very much from last year's 13 touchdowns, a career high for Terry. So I still trust him. I don't think he'll bust. I trust the floor with both of these guys. They're both really, really reliable options every single year. At 17 and 18, though, I got the wide receiver 2s on an elite offense, Jameson Williams of the Lions and Devontae Smith of the Eagles. They both move up 4 spots in my rankings, and I think you have to factor in the upside if potentially the wide receiver 1, Amon-Ra, or A.J. Brown go down. If that's the case, if JMO or Devontae Smith are the top target, then you have 17-point upside. You could get a top 5 receiver in those weeks, and that's just too valuable to pass up. But even if the injury doesn't happen to those players above them, the floor is still really high. The touchdowns are pretty much locked in. The Lions and Eagles offenses are some of the best in the NFL. So I trust the number 2 receiver. It's a very narrow target share, good enough to keep them top 20. That's what they were last season. Devontae was wide receiver 17, and JMO was number 19 in points per game. I think they're both going to be just as good this season. So I like them as reliable picks. If they ever fall to you in the 5th round, you are getting fantasy gold. Those are some of the best picks you can get in terms of value. But at 19 and 20 to round out the top 20, I got Garrett Wilson and Courtland Sutton, both wide receiver ones in their respective offenses. And I am dropping down Garrett Wilson by 3 spots. I just don't trust Justin Fields that much. And the touchdowns are going to be very hard to come by. Even though the volume is locked in, I can't imagine less than 150 targets for Wilson unless he gets hurt. I'm just worried he only gives you like 3 touchdowns on the season. If he somehow can score 10 plus, we might get a top 10 season out of Garrett Wilson, but it's very hard to actually bet on that and actually trust that it'll happen. So touchdowns are going to decide his fate, and they might totally burn you. He could be fool's gold. I'd rather get him in the 4th round, but still the volume will carry him to probably reliable top 20 production. Last year, that's what he was doing before they traded for Davante Adams. He was a top 20 receiver in those first 6 games with Aaron Rodgers. And Justin Fields knows him from college. There's no way Garrett Wilson isn't the top target in this offense, but the Jets not going to score many points. A little hard to fully trust, but still a valuable floor play week in, week out. And same applies with Courtland Sutton. Last year, he scored 8 touchdowns. The year prior, it was 10. And once again, just like Garrett Wilson, touchdowns will decide his fate this year. So I am dropping him down 1 spot with the addition of Evan Ingram and perhaps more of a reliance on the run game with an improved backfield this year in Denver. Maybe Sutton is not as safe as I may have given him credit for, but I also can't see a scenario where he falls off a cliff. I just don't see that happening. He got a contract extension. While he is turning 30 this year, I still think Sutton is money in the bank, a reliable option every single week. I don't think he's going to burn you, and odds are he comes close to 10 touchdowns once again. So I trust Courtland Sutton. He's a top 20 receiver in my opinion. I think he's being drafted too late in the ADP. Next up at 21 and 22, I got the speed demons, Xavier Worthy and Tyreek Hill. They can be unguardable, but then there's also like a red flag where one week they might completely disappear and you might get a big L because they're not even giving you like 5 points in your lineup. But they can also crack 30 plus points any given week. They can score from anywhere on the field, and their speed is their calling card. Xavier Worthy is the fastest man in the NFL, but the reason I'm dropping him down 4 spots, he used to be my wide receiver 17, is because of the Rashee Rice suspension that I don't know if it's going to happen or not. Rashee Rice appears to be available week 1. However, I've read some reports that the NFL was proposing suspending him by more than half the season. So I don't know what's going to happen. It may not happen this year. It might happen at the end of the year, and he might miss like 8 to 10 games. I used to think it was just going to be 4 to 6. So I still trust Xavier Worthy because I have no idea what's going to happen with Rashee Rice. But there is a scenario where I'm wrong about this and Rice is actually the wide receiver 1, not Xavier Worthy. So it could burn you. There is some risk here, but the speed is too tempting. The upside's too high. When he hits, Xavier Worthy has 30-point upside. And same applies with Tyreek Hill, but all of the vibes in Miami are just so bad. I genuinely believe that Tyreek Hill is going to get traded. So the transfer portal with Tyreek this season is going to be a big gamble. He could get a perfect landing spot where all of a sudden he's back inside the top 10 every single week at receiver. And then there's also a scenario where he gets traded to like the Rams and Stafford goes down, and now we have like a terrible, terrible player in fantasy. Tyreek could be a major bust. Last year, he did not rank top 30 in points per game. He really let you down last season. So I just can't rank him in the top 15. If you want to trust him, be my guest. But this feels like a player I'm going to nominate in the subscriber league auction and then never bid on, just let somebody else deal with his headache. I think Tyreek is a major bust candidate this season. So I'm going to pass. I understand the upside is just as high as Worthy. You could get 30 points any week, but you could also not crack 10 for like half the season and get burned week in, week out. I do not know what to expect from Tyreek Hill. His speed, though, is undeniable, and that's the reason why everyone likes him and wants to take him. 2 years ago, he was a top 2 receiver. At 23 and 24, I have DK Metcalf and Calvin Ridley. I'm upgrading them 2 spots, and they're very safe picks. They're both high-paid veterans with no target competition on technically a bad offense, but they both get a quarterback upgrade. There's a chance that this offense really turns it around, and there's double-digit touchdown upside for both of them. I trust Metcalf to get at least 9 targets a game. They're paying him top 4 at the position, and Rodgers did sustain 2 top 25 receivers last year. As long as he stays healthy, Metcalf feels bust proof. And same applies with Ridley, with Cam Ward entering the Tennessee offense. You know, the production's going to be much better than last year. I think there's no scenario where Ridley is not a top 30 receiver this year unless he gets hurt. He gets paid top 17 at the position, and there's no real threat for targets in Tennessee. Their defense sucks, and they're going to be in catch-up mode. A lot of volume is headed towards Calvin Ridley this season. So it's going to come down to touchdowns for these guys. Can they crack 10? Probably not. But last year, neither of them cracked 5, and I do think that's going to be the floor this season. I think they're probably going to score like 7 or 8 touchdowns this year and be very reliable options in fantasy. Top 25 receivers, in my opinion. And then at 25 and 26, I am dropping down Tet McMillan and Marvin Harrison Jr., both 2 spots. And as much as I want to trust the draft capital, there's actually some major bust potential with both players. When it comes to Tet McMillan, I used to trust him like crazy. I love Tet's upside, but he just dealt with a hamstring injury this weekend, and that's not something I want to deal with. I do not want to chase injuries when it's just week 3 of the preseason. So that's not good. I hope it doesn't derail him for too long, but he might miss like a few weeks, and then he might not be 100%. He might re-aggravate the injury, and that'd be a big headache to deal with throughout the season. So even though he was drafted top 8, I want to trust the draft capital. There's a chance that he just doesn't have a good rookie season. An injury in the preseason is just never a good sign. So not excited to fully endorse Tet anymore. As much as I like him, as much as I want to believe the upside is there, I don't want to be chasing injuries at this time in the offseason. With Marvin Harrison Jr., I kind of felt like I was ranking him too high at 24 in the first place, and honestly, I still feel like I'm ranking him too high. Last year, he wasn't even top 40 at the position, and he really burned you. I don't think his touchdown production is going up. I think, if anything, some of those are going to be vultured by Trey McBride. So I don't trust Kyler Murray very much. I don't trust this Cardinals offense very much. They didn't add any weapons to compete with him, but Marvin Harrison is not a player I believe in to have that breakout everyone is expecting. So I want to trust the draft capital, but there's just not enough to fully have me convinced. At wide receivers 25 and 26, I might be ranking both of these young guys a little too high, but they were both drafted top 10. You know that the offenses they play for are going to try and get them the ball, try and make them look good. They need it to work out. But next up at 27 and 28, I got the touchdown makers in their offenses. George Pickens and Deebo Samuel are both wide receiver 2s, but I think they're both going to crack at least 8 to 10 touchdowns this season. With Pickens, it's pretty obvious the Cowboys offense needs him like crazy. He's also in a contract season, and I already ranked him at 27, so I'm not budging. I'm trusting George Pickens to be a solid touchdown producer in Dallas, and it looks like their defense is going to be without Micah Parsons and Trayvon Diggs to start the season. They're going to find themselves in a lot of shootouts. So as long as Dak Prescott stays healthy, he's going to lean on Pickens in the red zone. I trust the touchdowns this year for George Pickens. And same applies with Deebo Samuel. He's been getting a lot of buzz in camp this season, a lot of practice time while Terry has been holding out, and I really trust him. Last year, I'm going to write off because of the pneumonia. I think he's going to bounce back and have a very productive season in Washington. They're paying a high salary. They traded for him. I think he's going to work out. There's a lot invested in Deebo, and the Commanders have a great offense. I trust Deebo Samuel this season to put up top 30 numbers. He's moving up 4 spots in my rankings. At 29 and 30, I have Travis Hunter and Emeka Egbuka. I'm going to trust that these rookie wide receiver 2s do live up to the elite potential. I think I was underestimating Travis Hunter a little too much earlier in the rankings. I'm bumping him up 9 spots. My previous concerns that he was going to play more on defense have slowly but surely been proven wrong. It looks like, if anything, he's going to be playing a lot more on offense in his rookie season. So Trevor Lawrence has sustained multiple top 30 wide receivers in the past. I think that's what's going to happen this year. And Travis Hunter might be elite. I might still be ranking him like 7 spots too low. It's possible he's better than guys like Courtland Sutton, Garrett Wilson, Xavier Worthy, and Tyreek Hill. So I think he will live up to the expectation. It's just a question of how quickly will he dominate, and it's possible it's as early as week 1. I don't want to fully miss the boat on Travis Hunter. I've been fading him all summer, and I'm starting to regret it. I think I've ranked him too low. I think I've ignored some of the true elite potential. I love Brian Thomas, but I don't think that takes anything away from Travis Hunter. Previously, I was kind of thinking about it in that regard. It was hard for me to see the path for Hunter. Now, I think I was a bit too blind this summer. So maybe some fear of missing out factors into this ranking, but I do think he's top 30. I do trust Travis Hunter to get the targets you need to be top 30 this season. And then Emeka Egbuka, I think maybe I overestimated him just a little bit, but I'm only dropping him down 2 spots. Some of the upside I was giving him, I think, should be going to Mike Evans just as much, but I don't know when Chris Godwin is coming back. All the camp reports are just so high on Egbuka, and even when Godwin comes back, I still think Egbuka is going to be a staple in your lineup. I still trust the Bucs offense to be hyper productive in fantasy, especially at wide receiver. So with the Rachaad White injury, I think they lean on the pass even more. And last year when Jaylen McMillan was the number 2 receiver, he was putting up top 20 numbers at the position, averaging over 13 points per game. I trust Egbuka to be doing that when Godwin's off the field. Once he comes back, it might trickle down to like 9.5, 10 points, and maybe he's closer to wide receiver 40 late in the season if Godwin is in fact fully healthy. But Evans is 32. He might miss some time as well. Egbuka can still crush in fantasy. I still love him as a 6th round target. At 31 and 32, though, I am upgrading both of the young guys, Ricky Pearsall and Matthew Golden. Both of these guys were drafted in the 1st round, and they're both entering the season as clear number 1 wide receivers in their offense. They also have banged up teammates. With Pearsall, I have no idea when Ayuk is going to come back, probably week 8 or maybe even later. And then with Golden, I don't know what's the deal with Jayden Reed. Jayden Reed is in a walking boot and might not be available until like week 3, week 4. I don't know what's going to happen. And then Pearsall, I do think, is going to be better than Golden because Jauan Jennings is also banged up. It looks like the Niners offense is Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, and Ricky Pearsall almost every single play. Those are the only 3 players that might get the ball in week 1 when the season kicks off. So I trust the draft capital. I think Pearsall is a good option. And in general, you want to be trusting the Kyle Shanahan wide receiver 1. So he might really crush this ranking. It's possible he finishes top 20 on the season. If you told me Pearsall was better than Garrett Wilson this year, I would not be that surprised. So I do like him a lot. He's moving up 9 spots in my rankings, just like Travis Hunter. I think I was underestimating him too much earlier, but there were reasons to trust Jauan Jennings when I did post that top 40 video earlier on in the season. But I also mentioned earlier in the offseason that wide receivers 25 through 40 are all kind of the same. The margin of difference last year was just less than 2 points, about 1.5 points between wide receiver 25 and 41. And so if you want to rank them lower, if you want to rank them in the top 26, you could justify it, be my guest. But at wide receiver 31, this is where I'll settle on Ricky Pearsall. Last year was extremely volatile. We have not seen him put up consistent numbers as of yet, but I do trust that that will happen this year. And then with Matthew Golden, I also think there are going to be some very consistent numbers for him as well. Jayden Reed going to miss some time. Now Romeo Doubs is injured, and all of the training camp reports I've read into say that Golden is exceptional and overwhelmingly the top target. They are definitely going to lean into this 1st round draft pick, and it's the first time in 2 decades that the Packers have taken a wide receiver this high. So they need this to work out. I think it will. I trust Jordan Love. I think he's going to be healthy, and consistently get Golden the ball. I think the upside we saw from Christian Watson back when he played with Rodgers is going to be there for Golden. If Golden's top 25 at the position, I also would not be surprised if he outscored Garrett Wilson this year. So love Matthew Golden. It's just a question of, will the expectations actually hit? We haven't seen it yet, but I think there's enough brewing in the ether to trust that he will work out. Definitely a top 40 wide receiver at the worst, and I bumped him up 7 spots up to wide receiver 32. I trust Pearsall and Golden, the top receivers in their offenses. Next up at 33 and 34, though, I honestly have no fucking clue where to rank these two guys. I got Jaylen Waddle at 33 and Rashee Rice at 34. They both move up 2 spots in my rankings, and they both have potential league-winning upside. With Waddle, the case is kind of simple. Tyreek Hill probably gets traded, and the reports I've read is that it might be the case where Waddle's actually the wide receiver 1 in Miami. Last year, that was not the case. He had a terrible season, his worst in his career, and it's hard to envision that 2 touchdowns are going to repeat for Waddle this season. So he probably gets better. He's probably more involved in the offense. And especially if Tyreek does get traded, you might get 150 targets out of Waddle. The case for Garrett Wilson might apply to Waddle once that trade does happen. And I am kind of expecting it. But then on the flip side, I'm also expecting Tua Tagovailoa to probably get hurt and maybe retire with another concussion. So what are we going to get from Waddle if Zach Wilson's the quarterback? I got no effing clue. I think the Dolphins are going to be a dumpster fire this season. So I'm not dying to invest in them, but at some point I have to rank them. The potential league-winning upside of Waddle is a factor that I wasn't really wanting to acknowledge earlier in the offseason. But at this point, I just can't pretend like it's not a real factor. There's a chance that Waddle is better than Tyreek Hill, and maybe I should be swapping them in the rankings. Potentially Waddle should be more of a top 20 guy. I might be ranking him 15 spots too low. It's possible I'm completely off base with this Waddle ranking, but I might be off base with this Rashee Rice ranking as well. In general, I never want to be drafting players that are going to be suspended, and with Rashee Rice, we have no idea what to expect. According to an article I just read, the league office was trying to suspend him for more than half the season in 2025. So even though at the moment it looks like he's avoided suspension, how long is that going to last? I do not feel safe expecting a full season out of Rashee Rice. So that's why I still trust Xavier Worthy as the top receiver in this offense. But according to all of the practice reports, when Rashee Rice is healthy, he's going to be the top target. Mahomes is going to be trusting him as the clear number 1. So I could be, again, like 20 spots too low on Rashee Rice. I might be completely off base here. If he puts up top 15 numbers when he's active, it would not shock me at all. That's what he was doing each of the last 2 seasons. And when he was healthy last year, he was actually top 3 at the position. So he's a potential league winner, but I just don't want to be betting on a guy that's going to be serving 30 days in jail at some point during his upcoming probation. I feel like avoiding the bad karma is probably a wise decision. I think you can win your league without him. And if I'm dead wrong on this and Rashee Rice is the player you need to win fantasy and he cost me a championship this year, so be it. I'm willing to get beaten by Rashee Rice on another roster. In general, I am not drafting Rashee Rice at all. I just don't trust it in the Chiefs offense. The suspension probably craters his fantasy season, but the upside's undeniable. I could be completely off base with this ranking. Like I mentioned, I have no idea what to do with either of these two players, and I'm willing to be wrong. I'm willing to be way too low on both of them. At 35 and 36, I got Zay Flowers and Rome Odunze, and I am dropping down both of them in the rankings. With Zay Flowers, he's moving down 4 spots. He's an unpredictable elite upside option, and 1 week he might get you 120 yards and a touchdown, 20 plus fantasy points. The next week he might get you less than 40 yards receiving and under 5 points in fantasy. So he's just a little too boom bust to trust. I think he's a better best ball selection, and that's why I think he does deserve to move down in my rankings. For the sake of redraft, I think he's too volatile to know exactly what you're going to get week in, week out. You might get very frustrated and he might burn you more often than you expect. And same goes with Rome Odunze. Last year, Rome was a absolute bust, but I do think that the volatility is going to be a annoying factor with Rome. However, when it hits, you could crack 25 fantasy points. There's just elite upside with a player of Rome's caliber. He's too talented. He was also drafted top 10, just like Marvin Harrison and Tet McMillan. I want to trust the draft capital. I want to trust the talent. But at the end of the day, the Chicago Bears wide receiver rotation is a major headache to trust. I just don't know exactly what we're going to get from a week-to-week standpoint, and that's going to be frustrating in your lineup. He might be the reason you win because he drops 30 points. He also might be the reason you lose because he drops less than 6 points. So good luck there. I think Flowers and Rome are a little bit too much of a roller coaster to feel great about, but they have undeniable upside. They could finish top 20 if the touchdowns are reliable this season. But then at 37 and 38, I'm probably ranking these guys too low. But in general, they're just floor plays, and that's just a little bit less enticing. I have DJ Moore right behind Rome Odunze, and then Jakobi Meyers at 38. These players offer reliable weekly floors, and you're probably locked into 10, 11 points on a week-to-week basis. They were both top 30 last season, and if they stay healthy, it might repeat. But I don't feel like that excited to have DJ Moore or Jakobi Meyers on my starting roster. I would much rather have them on the bench and just kind of bank in my flex spot a double-digit week from both of them. I trust the volume, but I don't trust the touchdowns. And even though they're in very safe situations, I just kind of prefer some options elsewhere on their team. Like with DJ Moore, I'd rather have Rome. It's more exciting. And then with Jakobi Meyers, maybe Brock Bowers and Ashton Genty, just keep him uninvolved enough where he's just not that valuable in general. So they were both top 30 last season. I might be too low, but I dropped them both down the rankings. DJ Moore 7 spots and Jakobi Meyers 5 spots. Just a little unexcited whenever I click the button on these players, but very safe picks, very valuable options. They're not going to score less than 2 points per game, less than wide receiver 24, 25. So maybe they're going to be finishing closer to that, but I think at the moment I will rank them a little closer to wide receiver 40 than 30. At 39 and 40, I got Jauan, Jennings, and Jordan Addison, and there are some early season concerns with these guys. With Jauan, he's dealing with a calf injury and is still kind of holding out for his contract extension. I think it'll get resolved, but will he be ready in week 1? I do not know, and it looks like he's being overtaken by Ricky Pearsall this season. Once Brandon Ayuk comes back, there's also the potential that he's the number 3 target and reverts back to the low-end production we saw a few years ago. Like 2 years ago, Jauan Jennings didn't even average 4 fantasy points per game. Last year, he was top 30 at the position, and it's possible he burns you once Ayuk returns, especially if Purdy does not trust him as much as Pearsall. It's a little bit risky with Jauan Jennings at the moment. So he moves down 5 spots right behind Jakobi Meyers. And then Jordan Addison, I am bumping down 3 spots because paired with the early season suspension, when he comes back, I don't love the scenario in those Europe games. He plays in Dublin and London in weeks 4 and 5, then has a bye in week 6. You might not feel comfortable starting him until week 7. Plus, I don't know what to expect from JJ McCarthy. I think that could be a major red flag. McCarthy does kind of scare me. So I'm not dying to trust Addison at this point in time, but he does have elite upside. Last year, he was top 21 at the position, and it might happen again. If McCarthy's as good as Darnold, then I might be ranking him literally 20 spots too low. So good luck with them, but in week 1, you're not starting either of them. And then outside the top 40, I still think you have some very interesting options, but maybe just a few more red flags than you would like. At 41 and 42, I got Stefon Diggs and Jayden Higgins, and I am going to rank Stefon Diggs 1 spot above Jayden Higgins. This tier is called the Houston wide receiver 2s, and last year that's what Diggs was doing. He was actually top 20 at the position, averaging 12.2 points per game. So will it repeat? Is it just a product of being Stroud's number 2 target? Or will Drake May get him the ball at a very high rate? Will he stay healthy? He's actually looked really good in camp based on the clips I've seen of him running routes. So Diggs is very interesting. Some really high upside. It could work out where he's just as good as last year, but at the age of 31, maybe he's got some higher injury risk that maybe is worth fading and not fully trusting. And then with Jayden Higgins, I love this player. I can't stop drafting him in round 8. He's now officially my most drafted player this summer on Underdog in best ball. And I think he's going to slide right into that Texans wide receiver 2 role. They gave him a fully guaranteed contract. I think guaranteed production is coming for Jayden Higgins this season. I trust Stroud to get him the ball. Moving forward, though, these players have not been ranked yet on my channel, and I'm going to try and go quickly, but let's also explain why I'm fading these guys. I got Chris Olave and Jerry Jeudy at wide receivers 43 and 44. And some of you think I'm a hater. Some of you have been wondering, where are these guys in your rankings? How are they not top 40? Well, I don't trust the quarterback. These are the worst quarterbacks to invest in the NFL. Maybe Flacco and Shadur Sanders is not terrible, but Jeudy has never looked good with the exception of the Jameis Winston starts last season. And if you remove the revenge game against Denver, his stats are not that impressive at all. So I don't want to be betting on Jerry Jeudy. Every time I've trusted him in the past, he's always burned me, and I just don't really feel comfortable taking the Browns wide receiver 1, especially at ADP in the 6th or 7th round. It feels too expensive. I just don't want to do it. I don't like taking him ever. So I don't want Jerry Jeudy this season. He's a full fade for me. And then Chris Olave is on my do not draft list. Yeah, last year he was not even top 50. Rashid Shaheed was actually much better on a points per game basis. And the concussions kind of concern me. If another one crops up, maybe Olave misses another 6 games because of it. But trusting Tyler Shuck is ultimately the reason why I don't want to do it. I'd rather go Olave than Jeudy, but ultimately I have no desire to be trusting the Saints wide receiver core. I want to draft players I actually want to watch every single week, and that does not apply to the Saints and Browns. I would much rather keep those games off of my television and not be glued to them, hoping for enough points to win my matchup. So they're on my do not draft list. I have no desire to target Olave or Jeudy, but they are wide receiver 1s, and the volume is going to be safe enough where the floor is probably good for like 8.5 points. So that's just not valuable enough to me based on ADP. I think they're going too high. I'd much rather get Jayden Higgins 2 rounds cheaper than both of them. Next up at 45 and 46, I got the high floor injured wide receiver 1s. Josh Downs and Khalil Shakir were actually much, much better than this last year in points per game. They were closer to about 10.5 points, respectively. But Josh Downs has a hamstring injury. You don't want to be chasing injuries, kind of similar to Tet McMillan. I think that's a major red flag. And then Khalil Shakir has been dealing with a high ankle sprain, but reportedly is going to be healthy for week 1. However, I'm legitimately worried that somebody else in their offense emerges as the top target. With Downs, I'm really worried about Tyler Warren stealing the show. With Khalil Shakir, I genuinely think that Keon Coleman could emerge and have a breakout season and overtake Shakir for the most production in Buffalo. But I do still trust them from a floor standpoint. As long as they're healthy, I think you can also bank like 9 points per week with these 2 options, but they might not be healthy to start week 1. And in general, I'm not dying to be chasing injuries. That's never a good sign. But same applies with these next 2 players. High ceiling injured wide receiver 2s, Darnell Mooney and Jayden Reed. If not for the injury, I'd probably both be ranking them inside my top 35. They were both top 36 receivers last season in their offenses. But Mooney dealing with a shoulder injury, expected to return sometime this year. That's not encouraging, but maybe it's week 2 and maybe he looks great. Again, I think once he is healthy, Michael Penix is going to be slinging it to him down the field. He has a very high upside if he can stay healthy with Michael Penix. So still a valuable piece. I still draft him at a discount, but it doesn't feel as safe and reliable. And then Jayden Reed still has elite upside any given week, but he's way too volatile. I think in redraft, he's not as good of a pick as he is in best ball. So for him to have that walking boot on, it's not exciting. I think it just came off, and it's possible he's ready for week 1. But in general, I think in redraft, in season-long formats, you don't feel safe putting him in your lineup every single week. He can score 30 points, he can score less than 6, and it's just a little too much of a roller coaster for me to be that excited about week in, week out. So good luck with these 2 guys. I think as bench stashes, they're very valuable, but to be trusting them in your lineup week 1 is too much of a gamble. They are low-end wide receiver 4s, in my opinion. But then lastly, in the top 50, I have Keon Coleman and Rashid Shaheed. Last year, they both got hurt, but they are really interesting deep threats that I think could crack the top 40 pretty easily. It's possible they're both more valuable than the players I have ranked above them alongside them in their offenses. Like Shakir is just a floor play. So if Keon gives you like a bunch of games with a 50-yard touchdown, he's going to be more valuable in terms of upside, but it might be more volatile. Similar to Jayden Reed and Darnell Mooney, it might be a big roller coaster week to week, and the volatility is probably not the best thing to bet on. He's a much better pick in best ball when you don't have to guarantee in your lineup that it's going to work out. When you have to decide to start him, it's not as safe. And same goes with Rashid Shaheed. There were 4 games when he was elite last year. He hit on those deep passes, but then there were 2 games when he was healthy where he was essentially giving you a bagel. He's kind of like the new Gabe Davis this time in New Orleans. And with a worse quarterback situation, it also does pose some red flags. But in points per game, he was better than Olave last year. One reason why I don't like drafting Olave is because I might not be getting the more valuable receiver in that offense. Last year, it was Shaheed when healthy. So good luck with them knowing when to start them. But if you hit on it, if you got them in the right week in your lineup, you could easily crack 15, 20 plus points because they are deep threats that can score from anywhere. Outside the top 50, though, they're nowhere near as safe. These 2 players specifically are starting the season on the PUP list. So you're planning to have them for the fantasy playoffs, not the beginning of the year. If you have an IR slot, then they do become more valuable. I have Chris Godwin and Brandon Ayuk at 51 and 52, and I think they're both guaranteed to miss at least 6 to 8 weeks this year. I do not know when they're going to return, and it might be longer than that. It's possible it's only 4 games, but in general, I don't think you're going to feel safe starting them until as early as week 9, if not week 10. So late in the season, I would love to have them. I think there's some elite upside for both of them. They could easily put up top 12 numbers when healthy, but there's also a scenario where they're just not the same players and they're just never healthy this season. They may not bounce back after some rough injuries. With Godwin, it was his ankle that just like snapped off. That one looked pretty gross. And then Ayuk didn't just tear his ACL, it was his MCL and meniscus. His entire knee got torn up. It's probably not going to be the same type of profile for him this year. But by the end of the season, in the month of December, when it matters most in the fantasy playoffs, they might be cracking 15 points per game. They might be the league winners you need this season. Next up at 53 and 54, some interesting deep threats. I got Luther Burden and Rashad Bateman, who are never going to be the defense's priority. Whenever they go up against a cornerback, it's never going to be the most talented defensive player on the opposing team because there's just too many other good weapons for the defense to worry about. And because of that, inevitably they will get forgotten about and will break one deep down the field for a big gain. So last year we saw Bateman score 9 touchdowns. It's possible that happens again, but some of those are probably going to go in favor of Zay Flowers this season. And then with Burden, last year Keenan Allen scored 7 touchdowns, but obviously some of them are going to go to Rome Odunze and DJ Moore. So I don't know exactly what to expect from these guys. It's going to be hard to trust them in your lineup, but I think from a bench stash standpoint, I think they have very high upside. And when you're desperate in the bye weeks, they might be a great flex play to insert in your lineup. They could easily crack 15 points as well, just like guys like Keon Coleman and Rashid Shaheed. So some high upside that's going to be hard to trust, but inevitably the defense will forget about them. At 55 and 56, I got some savvy veteran wide receiver 2s, Cooper Kupp and Keenan Allen, both over the age of 32 years old. They do have some injury risk, but they're both good players. They're both pretty productive. And when healthy, it wouldn't surprise me if they did put up top 30 numbers at the position. So I think starting week 1, you might have them in your lineup at the flex spot, and they might be really good contributors. But I am a bit worried about the receiver depth on their team. Like, if you told me Torrey Horton overtakes Cooper Kupp by the end of the season, I wouldn't be that surprised, especially expecting Cooper Kupp to get hurt. That's what's been happening. He's just not the same player anymore. His body has kind of broken down over the last few years, and the Rams moved off for a reason. But with Keenan Allen, I think he has one good year left in the tank, but he's more of like a third down reliable option. He's not going to get a shit ton of volume, but he also might score another 7 touchdowns like he did in Chicago last season. His chemistry already exists with Justin Herbert, and I do think he's the second most valuable receiver in the Chargers offense. So in the top 60, they might be really reliable options in your lineup this season, but at some point I would probably expect them to go down with injury. They probably get hurt at some point this year. At 57 and 58, I have Michael Pittman and Cedric Tillman. And for them, even though they have high upside as the number 2s in their offense, the quarterback just kind of ruins all of the upside and all of the fun. With Pittman, he was terrible last season with Anthony Richardson. Although he was okay with Joe Flacco, I don't know if that's going to be the case with Daniel Jones when he inevitably gets some starts. And Richardson appears to really trust Tyler Warren a lot more. And last year, Josh Downs did overtake Pittman in this offense, so I don't know what to expect from Pittman on a week-to-week basis. Last year, he barely cracked like 8 points per game, and when Richardson was the quarterback, it was even worse. So he wasn't top 50 last year. I don't see a scenario where it gets even better. I think it could be just as bad and maybe even worse. So Pittman is kind of off my board. I never like taking him. I don't want to be drafting the Colts wide receivers, especially with Tyler Warren emerging as a stud in that offense. With Cedric Tillman, he had some elite games last year when he was healthy and after Amari Cooper got traded. When he operated as the X receiver with Jameis Winston, he was actually elite in fantasy. So there's some high-end upside for Tillman. I don't want to underestimate him, but to expect him to just slide into your lineup and put up great numbers is pretty naive. There is a chance he's more valuable than Jeudy, but odds are that doesn't happen. There's also some hype on guys like Harold Fannin, and Njoku should be healthy, and maybe even Isaiah Bond does factor in as well. So Tillman, not my favorite pick, but he goes super late. I view him just as valuable as Pittman. In terms of ADP, I'd much rather target Cedric Tillman than Michael Pittman. At 59 and 60, I do have Demario Douglas and Wan'Dale Robinson, and with these two players, you're just banking a floor option. In redraft and season-long leagues, if you need a 7-point floor, go ahead and put them in the lineup. But in general, I'm never starting them. They're just bench stashes, but the volume and efficiency is going to keep them in the safe floor play category. I think they'll probably finish the season averaging about 7.5 points, but they're going to struggle to score more than like 5 touchdowns this year. And in general, the number 2 receivers in the Giants and Patriots offense is not that valuable. So while the upside is not that exciting, the floor is safe, and they are kind of bust proof, but they're rarely going to go over double-digit fantasy points. If that does happen and you did start them, it was kind of a lucky best case scenario, not really like a guaranteed situation to happen. So those are my top 60. At 61 and 62, I got Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer, last year's underwhelming Chargers wide receivers, but they do offer some touchdown upside. QJ, I still think, is the number 3 target in LA. I think he's better, more valuable than Trey Harris. That's not how he's being drafted. So I do still kind of consider targeting QJ at a big discount. And then Palmer maybe is this year's Mac Hollins. Maybe he scores like 7-8 touchdowns in the Bills offense, but it's going to be hard to know exactly when it'll happen. At 63 and 64, I have Adam Thielen and Christian Kirk. These veterans are just waiting to be replaced, but week 1, they might have a legit role. I don't trust them as the season goes on, and they probably get hurt just like they did last year once again. At 65 and 66, I have Jaylen McMillan and Trey Harris, and they're both number 4 options in a very crowded offense, but one that does score a lot of touchdowns. Like, especially with Godwin banged up, it's possible that McMillan does crack the end zone multiple times to start the season. It's possible he's an interesting flex option, but you're not going to know when to trust him. It's going to be very volatile, and in general, you probably just want to pass on him. He's probably not worth a bench stash unless it's a deeper league at the beginning of the season. And then with Trey Harris, I don't know what to expect from this rookie. I actually prefer Quentin Johnston, and that's not how they're being drafted. So the number 4 option in a crowded but good offense, not that enticing, but it's possible that touchdowns do carry them. There is some legit upside for these two options. At 67, 68, someone has to be the wide receiver 2 in these offenses, and it looks like the rookies Dante Thornton and Elika Yamanor, both drafted in the 4th round, are poised to have that role all to themselves. For Dante Thornton in Las Vegas, the deep shots are probably going to hit. He averaged 25 yards per catch last year in college, but also didn't catch more than 25 catches. So the volume not going to be that high, but the upside is interesting. In terms of like a deep threat gamble, maybe he can score from 70 yards out. With Ayamanor, I think he's going to be more involved in this offense, but it's just not a guarantee what to expect in Tennessee. I might be ranking him too low, but based on ADP, I am ranking him higher than where he goes off the board. At 69 and 70, I got Torrey Horton and Jaylen Noel, and both of these rookies I think could pop for very high production, but at the moment, they're just hoping to steal the job from a veteran above them. With Torrey Horton, he's definitely behind Cooper Kupp in week 1, but I definitely think he's above MVS at this point, and it's possible he emerges as the X receiver in Seattle. That could be a very valuable option, but at wide receiver 69, to trust him week 1 is probably not a wise decision. With Jaylen Noel, he may never beat out Christian Kirk, but I do think at some point it will happen. I think he's more talented. I think he has more upside, and inevitably I do trust Christian Kirk to cede that job to Jaylen Noel. But last year we did not get a number 3 receiver in Houston that was valuable. It's possible CJ Stroud cannot support more than 2 receivers, and maybe Noel is just not the guy you need this year. At 71 and 72, I got the Broncos wide receiver 2 rotation with Marvin Mims and Pat Bryant. Not sure who to trust, but in general, I only trust Courtland Sutton, Evan Ingram, and the 2 running backs in Denver. So good luck with them. It's not that exciting, but it does have some upside. Bo Nix is pretty legit. And then at 73, 74, I do have Romeo Doubs and Xavier Legette. They're going to be on the field, but they're kind of just sharing the crumbs in their offenses. And Romeo Doubs did just get hurt. He might be losing his job to Dontavian Wicks, and perhaps these guys are trade candidates. The fact that they invested number 1 wide receiver picks this year is not a good sign that their role is going to be expanding this season. But maybe I'm ranking Legette too low. Maybe you'd actually rather have him than Adam Thielen. But at the moment, with Tetairoa McMillan emerging and Jalen Coker looking somewhat decent, I don't trust Legette that much, and Romeo Doubs in general is just not that safe in your lineup. At 75 and 76, I have De'Ami Brown and A.D. Mitchell. Perhaps they're both this year's Alec Pierce. Somebody's got to run deep routes in their offenses. It looks like these guys are emerging as the number 3 weapons in Jacksonville and Indianapolis. At 77 and 78, I have Darius Slayton and Isaac Tesla. These are the wide receiver handcuffs, in my opinion. They probably don't crack your lineup this year unless a wide receiver above them goes down. But if that happens, they both have very, very high upside. Slayton was getting 11 targets per game last year when Neighbors was out with some concussions. And then Tesla will fit in very nicely, maybe have more of a role than I'm expecting. Tim Patrick was pretty good last year when Jameson Williams missed 2 games with a suspension. So I do think they have some value, but probably not worth drafting this year. And then lastly, to round out the top 80, I do have Tutu Atwell and Andre Yoshivas. And these guys have some appeal in the red zone because both of their offenses do run 11 personnel. So they are going to run routes, but they're not that exciting to trust on a week-to-week basis. They need touchdowns to hit, and without them, you probably don't crack 5 points. They're probably not worth rostering, except as handcuff options as well. So that's it for this video. My top 80 wide receivers have been ranked, but here on the screen, I'm only showing you the top 60 overall. So this is the breakdown. I think the top 10 are pretty much locked in. They're the most reliable options, and maybe you have a different order, but in the top 10, these are the names that everyone agrees are the wide receiver ones in fantasy. Wide receivers 11 through 20 are a little bit more risky, but I do think based on touchdowns and just the offenses they play in and volume, they will carry you to reliable top 25 production. Maybe they don't crack the top 15, but from a safety standpoint, you can't really go wrong unless they get hurt. Wide receivers 21 through 30, though, I think are great flex options and maybe a little more volatile, but as long as touchdowns hit, they're going to be very valuable in your lineup, they should crack 10 points pretty consistently this year. I would expect them to average close to 11.5, 12 fantasy points this season. At wide receivers 31 through 40, I still think you're going to get somewhere around 10 fantasy points per game from them. They're all pretty reliable. It's just a question of how often will it be consistent, and maybe it's more of a headache. Some of these guys are pretty volatile and may burn you from week to week, but also might win you your week with a 25-point game when they score a touchdown and go over 100 yards. It's definitely possible to happen with every single one of them. But outside the top 40, the only ones I really trust and really want to be starting are Stefon Diggs and Jayden Higgins. I have no desire to draft Olave and Jeudy at ADP. And then there's a lot of injury risk and high volatility with some of these deep threats. The top 50 does get a lot more risky. And then outside the top 50, injuries are a major concern. Age is a major concern. The offense they play in is a major concern. There's a lot of red flags once you're outside the top 50. But there is still some upside. I do think they should be drafted, and we'll see what happens this year. I hope they stay healthy in these last weeks of the preseason. I might have to update these rankings again after the final preseason game. So good luck to you. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I'll be ranking wide receivers every week this season and helping you make those start-sit decisions in your lineup. So stay tuned, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time. My name is Adam Riancho. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.